That day remains etched in my memory as the most exhilarating of my life. It began as an ordinary, uneventful day, the kind where you lose yourself in the mundane routines of existence without much conscious thought. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow across my apartment as I lounged on the sofa, idly flipping through television channels. But life, as always, has a knack for throwing curveballs when you least anticipate them. A peculiar gurgling noise emanating from the bathroom, followed by a resounding splash, jolted me upright. A knot formed in my stomach as I recognized the all-too-familiar sound of plumbing problems. Past experience had taught me the futility of ignoring such issues. My previous attempt at a DIY fix, guided by a YouTube tutorial, had only exacerbated the situation. With a sigh of resignation, I grabbed my phone and located the contact information of the local plumber. I'd hired him once before, and although our interaction was brief, I recalled him as efficient and professional. Still, the prospect of having a stranger in my personal space always induced a slight unease. Approximately an hour later, a knock echoed through the apartment. I opened the door to find him standing there, toolbox in hand, appearing as ruggedly handsome as I remembered. He was likely in his early 30s, perhaps a few years my senior, with a thick beard, sharp features, and arms that strained against his work shirt. His muscular physique conveyed an air of competence, suggesting he was more than capable of handling any plumbing challenge. "Hey, I'm here for the busted pipe," he announced, offering a polite smile as he entered. "Yeah, it's in the bathroom," I replied, gesturing for him to follow. Without hesitation, he proceeded to the bathroom to assess the damage. I observed him from the doorway as he crouched down, examining the mess beneath the sink. His movements were precise and practiced, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. My thoughts should have been focused on gratitude for his assistance, but instead, they drifted elsewhere. The way his shirt clung to his back as he worked, the subtle flex of his muscles with each movement, captivated my attention. I shook my head, attempting to dispel these thoughts. He's just the plumber, I reminded myself, feeling slightly absurd for entertaining such notions. Yet, there was an undeniable magnetism in his quiet confidence and demeanor that made my heart beat a little faster. After a few minutes, he stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "All set," he declared, turning to face me. "Replaced the pipe, tightened everything up. Shouldn't give you any more trouble." "Thanks," I responded, striving for a casual tone despite the acceleration of my pulse at his proximity. "I appreciate it." His eyes lingered on me for a beat, and I could have sworn there was an unspoken message in his gaze. He cleared his throat and glanced around the small bathroom, as if searching for a pretext to prolong his stay. "You sure there's nothing else you need help with?" he inquired, his tone casual, yet laced with an undercurrent that sent a shiver down my spine. For a moment, I was speechless. Was it my imagination, or was there something more behind his question? My heart raced as I searched for a response. The lengthening silence intensified my awareness of a reluctance to let him leave. "Well, actually," I began, feeling a blush rise in my neck. "There might be something else." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze locking onto mine as he took a step closer. "Oh? What's that?" I swallowed hard, my nerves getting the better of me. "It's hard to explain," I stammered, my cheeks burning under his steady gaze. His lips curved into a knowing smile as he closed the distance between us. "You can try." I stood frozen, the air thick with unspoken tension. The warmth radiating from his body was palpable, and my mind raced with a torrent of unarticulated thoughts. The attraction I felt was undeniable, as was the rapid pounding of my heart under his watchful gaze. Before I could censor myself, the words escaped my lips. "I've been thinking about you," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper ever since you walked in. I haven't been able to stop. His smile deepened, and for a fleeting moment, time seemed to slow. He took another step closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. My breath hitched as I registered our proximity, the ease with which I could reach out and touch him. "Is that right?" he murmured, his voice low and husky, as if testing the waters. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I didn't know how to articulate the unexpected feelings his presence had stirred within me. All I knew was that I couldn't stop thinking about him, and I didn't want to. For a suspended moment, neither of us moved, the air charged with anticipation. And then, just as I thought the moment would pass, he reached out and gently cupped my face in his hand. His touch was warm and firm, yet gentle, sending a shiver down my spine as his thumb brushed lightly against my cheek. I was caught between the impulse to pull away and the desire to lean into his touch. Before I could react, he closed the gap between us and kissed me. The kiss started soft, tentative, almost exploratory. But the moment our lips connected, the hesitation vanished, replaced by a powerful, undeniable urge. His hands moved over my body, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened, sending a wave of heat through me. The sensation was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Each touch, each kiss ignited sparks throughout my body, leaving me wanting more. The world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of us immersed in the intensity of the moment. The passion between us escalated with each passing second. His hands, calloused from years of labor, explored my body with a surprising tenderness that stole my breath. The firm pressure of his lips against mine sent surges of heat through my veins. The only sound that anchored me to reality was the dripping water from the newly repaired pipe, a subtle reminder of our location and the unfolding events. But even that seemed distant as we lost ourselves in the heat of the moment. I pulled him closer, my fingers gripping his shirt, feeling the solid muscles of his chest beneath. He responded with a low groan, his hands tightening around my waist as if he couldn't bear to let me go. The kiss intensified, and for a brief period I forgot everything else. The outside world, the lines we were crossing. Just as suddenly as it began, reality came crashing back. He broke the kiss first, his breathing heavy, his eyes searching mine as if trying to comprehend what had just transpired. I stood there, heart pounding, my mind reeling from the realization of our actions. I began, but the words caught in my throat. What could I possibly say? That I hadn't anticipated this? That I didn't understand what had come over me? His gaze softened, the earlier intensity replaced by a more uncertain, vulnerable expression. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his hand still gently resting on my waist. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just surprised, I guess." He chuckled softly, easing some of the tension. "You and me both." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We stood close enough to feel the warmth radiating from each other's bodies, both unsure of how to proceed. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. What now? I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. "I didn't expect this," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But I don't regret it." His eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Relief, perhaps, or understanding. He stepped back slightly, giving me some space, but kept his hand on my arm. Neither do I. The simplicity of his words resonated deeply. It wasn't a grand declaration of love or an elaborate promise, just pure, raw honesty. And somehow, that made it even more genuine. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing around the small bathroom as if searching for an escape route. "I should probably finish up and head out," he said, though his voice held a note of hesitation, suggesting he wasn't entirely ready to leave. I nodded, but the thought of his departure caused a tightening in my chest. I didn't want this to end, didn't want him to walk out and leave me alone with the memory of what had just occurred. But I also didn't know how to ask him to stay, or if it was even appropriate. "You don't have to rush," I said, my voice a little too casual. "I mean, if you're not busy." He raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on his lips. "Are you asking me to stick around?" A blush warmed my neck. "I just thought we could hang out for a bit, maybe grab a drink or something." He chuckled again, this time a little louder. "You're pretty smooth, you know that?" I shrugged, feigning nonchalance despite my racing heart. Just trying to be a good host. He grinned, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Well, in that case, I guess I can stick around for a bit." We left the bathroom, the tension between us dissipating slightly as we returned to the living room. I retrieved a couple of beers from the fridge, handing him one as we settled onto the couch. For a moment, things felt almost normal, like two people simply enjoying a quiet afternoon together. But the underlying tension remained, the unspoken acknowledgement of what had transpired between us. He took a long sip of his beer, leaning back against the couch as he surveyed the apartment. "Nice place," he commented casually. "Thanks," I replied, my thoughts still racing. "It's small, but it works." We engaged in small talk for a while, discussing work, the weather, the typical topics people resort to when avoiding more meaningful conversation. But the more we talked, the more at ease I felt. The earlier tension had given way to an easy rapport that surprised me. It felt like we'd known each other longer than just a couple of encounters, as if there was a natural connection between us. And yet, beneath the surface, the simmering heat remained. Every time our eyes met, every time our fingers brushed, I felt the pull, the desire that hadn't faded. Despite our attempts to act normal, the conversation eventually died down, leaving a comfortable silence. We sipped our beers, gazing out the window as the late afternoon sun began to descend. "Ever think about what just happened?" I asked, breaking the quiet. He turned, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot." I couldn't tell if I should feel relieved or anxious. He placed his beer on the table, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. I think we both know there's something here." My heart pounded. Hearing him verbalize it made everything more real, more tangible. I gave a slow nod, unable to trust my voice. "I'm not saying I understand what this is," he continued, his tone cautious yet steady. "But I know I don't want to act like it didn't happen." I swallowed hard, my pulse accelerating. "Neither do I." He smiled, the tension between us morphing into something more solid, more assured. "So, where do we go from here?" The question lingered, and for a moment, I was at a loss. I didn't have all the answers, barely any, but I was certain about one thing. I didn't want this to end, not yet. "I guess we figure it out," I replied softly, but with conviction. He nodded, leaning back against the couch, his gaze fixed on mine. "I'm good with that." The setting sun cast a warm golden glow through the windows. The world outside felt miles away, irrelevant. In that moment, it was just the two of us in the quiet of my apartment, the unspoken promise of something more hanging in the air. As evening approached, the warm light softened everything, creating a sense of intimacy. We sat in silence, content in the comfortable quiet. Yet, the weight of what had transpired between us was palpable, undeniable. Unspoken thoughts began to surface. Luke, the plumber, as I'd learned from our earlier chat, shifted on the couch, his knee brushing against mine. The light contact ignited a spark, a reminder of the underlying tension. He looked at me, his gaze soft yet serious, carefully considering his words. "I don't usually do this," he said quietly. "You know, get involved with clients." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't think you did." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "I'm not saying I regret it because I don't, but it's just, I wasn't expecting this." "Neither was I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "But I'm not sorry it happened." Luke's gaze softened, and he offered a small smile. "Me either." The silence returned, but this time, it felt different, heavier, charged with meaning. I felt the pull between us, the same electricity from the moment he arrived. It was undeniable, and now that we'd acknowledged it, impossible to ignore. He shifted closer, his knee pressing more firmly against mine as he leaned forward slightly. "What are we doing?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. I didn't have a logical answer. All I knew was that there was something between us, something inexplicable, something I didn't want to lose. I searched his face, hoping he felt the same confusion, the same pull. When our eyes met, I knew he did. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart pounding. "But I don't want it to stop." His eyes darkened, and for a second, I thought he might retreat, suggest we leave things as they were. Instead, he reached out, his fingers lightly brushing my hand. The touch was gentle, almost tentative, but it sent a jolt through me. I found myself leaning into him, closing the distance. "I don't either," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. Before I could respond, his hand cupped the back of my neck, pulling me closer until our lips met again. This kiss was different, less hesitant, more certain, like we'd both made a decision. The heat between us flared, intense and consuming. I lost myself in the moment, in the feeling of his hands on my skin, his lips on mine. We stumbled back onto the couch, our bodies pressed close together as the kiss deepened. My heart raced, and I couldn't get enough of him, the taste of him, the feel of his body against mine. Every touch was exhilarating, and I knew I was completely hooked. Luke's hands roamed over my back, pulling me closer as his lips moved to my neck, sending shivers down my spine. I tangled my fingers in his hair, my breath coming in short gasps as he kissed a trail along my jawline. The intensity was overwhelming, but I didn't want it to end. I didn't want him to stop. But then, as quickly as it began, Luke pulled back, breathing heavily, staring down at me. His eyes held a mixture of desire and hesitation, and I could see the internal struggle. He wanted this as much as I did, but something held him back. "Wait," he whispered, his voice rough. "We need to slow down." Low. I blinked, my mind still reeling. "Why?" He exhaled slowly, hands still on my shoulders. "Because I don't want this to just be a one-time thing." His words hit me hard. Caught up in the heat of the moment, I hadn't considered the aftermath. But now, hearing him say it, I realized I didn't want it to be a one-time thing either. "I don't either," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. Luke's eyes softened, and he leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead before pulling back slightly. "Then let's not rush. Let's take our time." I nodded, my heart pounding. He was right. Whatever was developing between us was too important, too real to rush. I didn't want to spoil it by moving too fast. We sat there for a moment, catching our breath as the intensity subsided. Even though we'd pulled back, the connection between us still burned, and I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of quiet conversation and stolen glances. We talked about everything and nothing, laughing at silly things and sharing stories about our lives. It was easy, natural, like we'd known each other for much longer than a few encounters. But beneath the surface, the tension still simmered, waiting for the right moment to resurface. When Luke finally got up to leave, I felt a pang of disappointment. I didn't want him to go, didn't want the night to end, but I knew we were taking things slow, building something more than a fleeting moment. He lingered by the door, his hand on the handle, turning for one last look. "I'll see you again soon, right?" I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Definitely." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Good. I'll call you." With that, he opened the door and stepped out into the night, leaving me standing in the quiet of my apartment, my heart still racing. I leaned against the door, replaying the evening's events over and over. It wasn't just the physical connection, it was the deeper connection we'd made, the mutual acknowledgement that this wasn't just a one-time thing. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, like maybe, just maybe, I had found something real, something worth holding on to. But the story didn't end there. The best part was yet to come. The following days were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness. I couldn't stop thinking about Luke, about everything that had happened, about what might happen next. He'd said he would call, and even though I knew it hadn't been long, I found myself checking my phone constantly, waiting for his name to appear. When the call finally came, it was late afternoon, the golden light of the setting sun filling my apartment. My heart leaped when I saw his name, and I quickly answered. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual despite my quickened pulse. "Hey," he replied, his voice low and warm. "I was wondering if you'd like to grab a drink tonight. Nothing fancy, just, to hang out." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Yeah, I'd like that." "Great," he said, a hint of relief in his voice. "I'll pick you up around 7. Perfect." I hung up, my heart racing with excitement and nerves. I knew tonight wasn't just about drinks. It was about figuring out what was happening between us, about taking the next step. Despite the uncertainty, I felt a sense of calm. I wanted to see where this would lead, to explore the connection we had. By 7, I was more than ready. I'd spent the afternoon trying to focus on anything but the growing anticipation. Now that the moment had arrived, I felt strangely at ease. When Luke knocked, I opened the door to find him standing there in a simple button-down shirt and jeans, looking effortlessly handsome. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. "Yeah," I replied, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. We headed to a small, cozy bar not far from my place, the kind of spot that wasn't too crowded but had enough atmosphere to feel alive. We found a booth in the corner, away from the noise, and ordered drinks. As the evening unfolded, it became clear that the tension between us was still present, but it had transformed into something different, something more comfortable, less urgent. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He told me stories about his work, about growing up in the city, and I shared my own stories, how I ended up in my apartment, the small challenges we all face. It was easy, natural, like we'd known each other much longer than we actually had. But as the evening wore on, the conversation shifted, and the weight of what had happened between us began to creep back in. "So," Luke said, taking a sip of his drink before setting it down, his gaze steady on mine. "We haven't really talked about the other night." My heart skipped a beat. I nodded. "Yeah, we haven't. I'm not trying to rush things," he continued, his voice soft but serious. I've been thinking about it a lot. About us." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. My pulse quickened. This was it. The moment of decision. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing," he said, echoing my own thoughts from that night in my apartment. I think there's something here. Something worth exploring." His words hung in the air, and I felt a surge of emotion. I'd been thinking the same thing, that whatever was happening between us was too significant to simply walk away from. Hearing him voice it made it feel more real, more attainable. "I agree," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing either." Luke's expression softened, and he reached across the table, his hand lightly brushing mine. The simple touch sent a thrill through me, and I couldn't help but smile. "So, what do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He chuckled softly, his thumb brushing the back of my hand. "I guess we take it one step at a time." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief. We didn't need all the answers right now. We didn't need to know exactly where this was going. All we had to do was take it one day at a time, figure things out as we went along. We spent the rest of the night talking and laughing, the tension easing into something more comfortable, more certain. When the bar finally closed, we walked back to my place, the cool night air wrapping around us as we strolled through the quiet streets. At my door, Luke hesitated, his gaze flickering between me and the entrance. "I should probably go," he said, though there was a hint of reluctance in his voice. I bit my lip, not wanting the night to end just yet. "You don't have to." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. For a moment I thought he might pull away, but then he smiled, his hand slipping into mine as he stepped closer. "Okay," he whispered. We headed inside, the quiet of the apartment enveloping us as I closed the door. For a moment, we just stood there, the weight of the night hanging between us. Then Luke reached out, pulling me close, and I felt the warmth of his body against mine, the steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. The kiss came naturally, soft and slow at first, but quickly deepening, the familiar heat building between us. It was just like before, intense and consuming, but this time there was something more, something deeper. It wasn't just about the physical connection anymore. It was about the bond we were forming, the trust and understanding that had grown between us. We stumbled toward the couch, our bodies pressed together as the kiss deepened. My hands roamed over his back, feeling the firm muscles beneath his shirt, and a thrill of excitement rushed through me. But this time, there was no urgency, no rush. We were taking our time, savoring every touch, every kiss. Luke's hands slid under my shirt, his fingers warm against my skin, and I shivered at the sensation. His touch was gentle, careful, like he was afraid of pushing too far, too fast. But I didn't want him to hold back. I wanted him to know that this was okay, that I was ready for whatever came next. I pulled away from the kiss just long enough to look into his eyes, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I want this." Luke's eyes darkened and he nodded, his hands tightening on my waist as he pulled me closer. "Me too," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. We continued for hours, and as true love arises, that happened right there.